1970s was a turbulent time in South America. The Cold War raged on, dividing the world into capitalist and communist blocs. Many South American nations found themselves caught in the crossfire. The region was a hotbed of political activism and social unrest. Leftist movements gained momentum, challenging traditional power structures. This wave of change alarmed conservative forces, including the military and wealthy elites. Amidst this backdrop, a sinister plan was hatched in the shadows. The seeds of Operation Candor were sown in the corridors of power. Paranoid leaders saw their own citizens as the enemy within. They believed any form of dissent was a threat to national security. To crush this threat, they resorted to brutal methods. Their paranoia set the stage for a reign of terror. The stage was set for a clash of ideologies and a brutal crackdown. In this atmosphere, Operation Candor was born. This covert operation became synonymous with state-sponsored terrorism. It was a dark chapter in Latin American history. Across South America, military coups toppled democratically elected governments one by one. In Argentina, a junta seized power in 1976, ushering in a period of brutal repression known as the Dirty War. Chile witnessed a similar fate in 1973 when General Augusto Pinochet overthrew Salvador Allende, the democratically elected socialist president. These coups were not isolated incidents, but rather part of a coordinated wave of authoritarianism that swept through the region. The dictatorships that emerged shared a common ideology: anti-communism, fervent nationalism, and a deep-seated fear of leftist movements. They saw themselves as bulwarks against the communist threat, often justifying their brutality as necessary to preserve order and national security. However, their true motives were often more self-serving, driven by a desire to maintain their grip on power and silence any opposition. These regimes, united by their shared ideology and thirst for control, formed a sinister alliance. They saw strength in numbers, believing that by working together, they could more effectively crush dissent and maintain their grip on power. This alliance, born out of fear and a shared lust for control, would have devastating consequences for millions of people across the continent. It was a pact forged in darkness, a conspiracy among dictators that would unleash a wave of terror and repression unlike anything the region had ever seen. In 1975, representatives from Argentina, Bolivia, Chile, Paraguay, and Uruguay met in Santiago, Chile. It was here, in the shadows of Pinochet's dictatorship, that the framework for Operation Candor was laid. The operation, shrouded in secrecy, was a coordinated effort to eliminate political opponents, activists, and anyone perceived as a threat to the regimes in power. It was a pact forged not on paper but in hushed tones and clandestine meetings. The dictatorship agreed to share intelligence, resources, and even prisoners. They created a network of death squads and secret prisons operating beyond the reach of law or accountability. Victims were often kidnapped, tortured, and eliminated. They were disposed of in unmarked graves. or thrown from airplanes into the sea. Operation Condor was a testament to the depravity and ruthlessness of these regimes, a chilling example of how far they were willing to go to maintain their grip on power. The agreement marked a dark turning point in the region's history. It formalized a system of transnational repression, allowing dictatorships to hunt down their opponents even beyond their borders. This chilling pact, hidden from the world's eyes, would have devastating consequences for thousands of innocent people. At the heart of Operation Condor was a cold and calculated system of repression. Dictatorships, once isolated by national borders, now operated as a sinister collective. This cooperation was unprecedented in its scope and brutality. The machinery of repression was vast and multifaceted. One key element was joint intelligence operations. Military attachés acted as the eyes and ears of the dictatorships. They gathered information on political exiles and suspected dissidents. These attachés were instrumental in identifying targets. The information was fed into centralized databases. These databases tracked movements and monitored activities. This coordination allowed regimes to target individuals efficiently. The machinery of repression was designed to be inescapable. Dictatorships created a transnational web of terror. Fear and paranoia permeated every aspect of life. Life under Operation Condor was like living in a panopticon, constantly under the watchful eye of an unseen guard. The regimes cast a wide net of surveillance, monitoring every aspect of their citizens' lives. This web of surveillance infiltrated every facet of society. Neighbors were encouraged to inform on one another. Children were taught to report any dissent. This culture of fear created a climate of self-censorship. The constant threat of surveillance and repression cast a long shadow over the lives of those living under Operation Condor. Fear became an insidious presence, seeping into every aspect of daily life. People were forced to navigate their world with extreme caution, always aware that their every move could be monitored, their every word misinterpreted and used against them. The fear of being disappeared, of being snatched from the streets or from their homes in the dead of night, haunted countless families. Disappearances became a chilling hallmark of the era, a tactic used to silence dissent and instill terror in the hearts of the population. The victims, often political activists, students, journalists, or anyone suspected of opposing the regimes, were rarely seen or heard from again. Those who dared to speak out against the regimes or challenge their authority risked imprisonment, torture, and even death. Secret prisons, often located in remote areas or on military bases, became sites of unspeakable cruelty. Torture methods were brutal and varied, designed to break the spirit and extract information or confessions. The psychological toll of living under such oppressive conditions was immense. The constant fear, the suspicion, the lack of freedom, and the ever-present threat of violence took a heavy toll on the mental and emotional well-being of individuals and communities. The trauma of this period would have a lasting impact, leaving deep scars on the social fabric of the affected nations. Operation Condor's web of repression extended far beyond South America. It snaked across continents, reaching Europe and North America. Exiles seeking safety found themselves hunted by the regimes they fled. Dictators saw no distinction between local and distant opposition. Any dissent was a threat to their power. Exiles organizing resistance became targets. Methods to silence them were ruthless. Assassination attempts by death squads were a terrifying reality. Hit squads stalked their victims, waiting to strike. Exiles were abducted and taken to clandestine detention centers. Kidnappings in broad daylight showed the regime's brazenness. Nowhere was safe. No one was beyond their reach. Operation Condor's reach extended beyond South America, enveloping exiled communities in fear and suspicion. Whispers of the operation spread through these communities like wildfire. Trust became precious as exiles grew wary of strangers and questioned friends. The fear of surveillance became a heavy burden. Exiles changed routines to evade invisible eyes. The psychological toll was immense, mingling past trauma with constant threat. Dictatorships infiltrated exiled communities to silence dissent. Agents posing as sympathizers gathered information, eroding trust. These infiltrations sowed seeds of doubt and suspicion. Operation Condor was a psychological weapon to silence opposition. Fear, uncertainty, and isolation were used to crush dissent. Even the thought of opposition was met with paralyzing fear. For many who escaped the dictatorships, exile was a double-edged sword. It offered sanctuary from danger, a chance to rebuild lives free from persecution, yet it came at a heavy price: separation from loved ones, uncertainty, and lingering fear. The transition to a new life was fraught with challenges. Language barriers, cultural differences, and the struggle to find employment and housing created significant obstacles. Many exiles found themselves working menial jobs, their skills rendered useless. Despite hardships, many remained committed to the struggle for democracy and human rights. They formed organizations, published newsletters, and organized protests. Their efforts raised international awareness and mobilized support for democracy. However, the threat of Operation Condor cast a long shadow over their activism. Exiles took precautions, holding secret meetings and using code words. The fear of infiltration was real, and the consequences could be deadly. Living in a state of anxiety and uncertainty became the norm. Central to the horrors of Operation Condor were the secret police forces of the participating regimes. These shadowy organizations became the primary instruments of state-sponsored terror. They were responsible for kidnappings, torture, and assassinations. Each country had its own notorious secret police force. Argentina, Chile, Uruguay, and Brazil. Training in brutality. The School of the Americas, a U.S. Army institution, trained Latin American military and police personnel. Established in 1946, it became notorious for producing human rights abuses. Graduates held key positions in secret police forces and death squads. Critics argue the school remains a symbol of U.S. complicity in Latin American human rights abuses. The faces of repression. Behind the statistics of disappearances lay countless shattered lives. Jose, a student activist, was abducted and never seen again. Maria, a journalist, was gunned down for exposing the truth. Pablo, a trade unionist, was tortured and imprisoned without trial. These stories highlight the human cost of Operation Condor. They are a testament to the courage of those who resisted and the ongoing struggle for justice. A region in chains. Operation Condor's impact on South America was devastating. Democracies became police states, with citizens living in fear. Political opponents, activists, and journalists were targeted. The judiciary was corrupted, and the rule of law replaced by fear. Economic mismanagement led to hyperinflation and poverty. The social fabric was torn apart, leaving a legacy of inequality and resentment. One of the most chilling legacies of Operation Condor is the haunting specter of the disappeared. Thousands were abducted and never seen again, creating perpetual uncertainty and fear. Bodies were disposed of in unmarked graves or thrown into the ocean. The full extent of the horrors may never be known, but survivors and human rights organizations continue to shed light on this dark period. The testimonies of survivors reveal the regime's brutality. The systematic repression of Operation Condor had a profound and lasting impact on the social fabric of the Southern Cone. Fear permeated daily life, shaping behavior long after the dictatorships fell. Trust in government institutions and within communities eroded. The use of informants and surveillance created a climate of suspicion. Self-censorship hindered free speech and open dialogue. The trauma of this period left deep psychological scars, affecting families and communities for generations. As the dictatorships of South America unleashed the horrors of Operation Condor, the world largely remained unaware. The regimes concealed their crimes through propaganda and manipulation. The Cold War context muted the international response. The U.S. provided support to these regimes, viewing them as allies against communism. Media faced censorship and intimidation, keeping the truth hidden. Human rights organizations and brave individuals eventually brought the horrors to light. While the U.S. government's official stance opposed human rights abuses, its actions often told a different story. The U.S. provided significant support to South American dictatorships, viewing them as allies against communism. This support included military aid, training, and intelligence. The CIA was complicit in the repression, providing intelligence and support. U.S. actions emboldened the regimes and undermined its credibility as a champion of human rights. The legacy of U.S. involvement continues to cast a long shadow over U.S. Latin America relations. It serves as a reminder of the dangers of prioritizing ideology over human values. Despite the secrecy, the truth about Operation Candor slowly emerged. Human rights organizations, journalists, and families of victims chipped away at the wall of impunity. The end of the Cold War allowed for a critical examination of U.S. foreign policy. Survivors began to share their stories, providing crucial evidence for prosecutions. Investigations and prosecutions opened in several South American countries. These trials represent a significant step towards accountability and recognition of the suffering endured. The pursuit of justice for the victims of Operation Candor has been a long and arduous journey. The operation's clandestine nature and deliberate attempts to erase evidence have made accountability difficult. Yet, the quest for justice endures, driven by survivors, families, and human rights advocates. Across South America, the fight for justice has taken different forms. In Argentina and Chile, significant progress has been made in bringing former leaders to trial. These trials symbolize accountability and provide closure for victims' families. However, in other countries, justice has been slow or non-existent. Amnesty laws in Uruguay have shielded many from prosecution. In Brazil, a lack of political will has hampered efforts to address the dictatorship's legacy. These disparities highlight the ongoing challenges in confronting the past. Despite these challenges, the pursuit of justice remains vital. Time has not diminished the moral imperative to hold those responsible accountable. Justice is about acknowledging suffering, honoring memory, and preventing future atrocities. The legacy of Operation Candor continues to cast a long shadow over South America, shaping the region's political landscape, social dynamics, and collective memory. The trauma of this period, with its widespread human rights abuses, political repression, and economic instability, has left deep scars on the national psyches of the affected countries, hindering the healing process and posing significant challenges to reconciliation. One of the most significant challenges in confronting the legacy of Operation Candor is the persistence of silence and denial. For decades, many of those responsible for the abuses enjoyed impunity, their crimes unacknowledged and their victims forgotten. This culture of silence, often enforced through fear and intimidation, made it difficult for survivors to come forward with their stories and for societies to fully confront the truth about their past. However, in recent years, there has been a growing movement across South America to break the silence and reclaim the memory of the victims of Operation Candor. Human rights organizations, artists, academics, and most importantly, survivors and their families have played a crucial role in this process, demanding truth, justice, and reparations for the crimes committed. The process of reconciliation is not simply about bringing perpetrators to justice. It is also about acknowledging the suffering of the victims, addressing the root causes of the violence, and creating a more just and equitable society. This requires a willingness to confront uncomfortable truths, to engage in open and honest dialogue, and to work together to build a future where such atrocities are unthinkable. The lessons of Operation Candor extend far beyond South America. They remind us of democracy's fragility, the dangers of unchecked power, and the human cost of extremism. We must remember these lessons and remain vigilant to safeguard freedom and justice. Strengthening democratic institutions and civil society is crucial. International cooperation and accountability are essential. By confronting the truth, we can heal and prevent future atrocities.